The snow didn't fall soft that morning. It came down like dust shaken from heaven, indifferent and dry, clinging to every corner of the weather-worn town. It gathered in the creases of roofs, in the window-sills of empty shops, in the hollows where wagon wheels once turned. The cold didn't howl, it hushed. A silence so deep it pressed against your ribs like grief not spoken. Steam curled from a tin cup, the only motion on the porch of the saloon, where a man sat alone at a table built more for summer. His coat was thick buffalo hide, darker than the timber walls behind him. Snow salted his hat brim, gathered on his shoulders like a weight he hadn't yet shaken off. A plate sat in front of him, mashed potatoes, crisp brown chicken, gravy so warm it sent up little ghosts into the morning air. She stood 10 feet from him, barefoot. She didn't say a word, didn't blink against the cold. Just watched the food with eyes the color of muddy riverbanks after the thaw, wide, sunken, tired in a way no child's eyes should be. Her coat was blue once, now threadbare and frayed at every seam. Her feet, red and raw, shifted only once against the packed snow. Callum Graves didn't look at her. Not directly. He watched the street instead as if she were part of the landscape. The way snow drifts. The way wind creaks a shutter. A thing that exists but doesn't ask. He lifted his fork, then stopped. Sat still. From behind the saloon window, townsfolk watched. Lips moved. Names were spoken. One man chuckled low. One woman clutched her shawl tighter, shaking her head like she'd seen this coming. Callum set the fork down slow. He took a breath through his nose, leaned back and pushed the plate a few inches forward. Not toward her. Just forward. His eyes stayed on the horizon. The girl didn't move. "You gonna eat that?" he asked the cold air. Still nothing. Just her breath fogging in little bursts. She didn't cry. Not then. Not yet. He sighed. Loud enough for her to hear it, quiet enough to pretend he hadn't meant her to. "You don't talk, I reckon?" A shake of her head. "You don't beg either." No answer. But her eyes flicked once, quick and fierce, from the steam to his face. He leaned his elbow on the table. "That plate's gonna get cold, you keep staring." The girl stepped forward. 2 steps. Then one more. Her toes curled when they touched the snow-covered bench. She climbed onto it like she was used to sitting where she wasn't welcome. Still, Callum didn't look at her. He cut a piece of chicken, slid it across the plate to the edge near her. Then he turned the cup slightly, just enough so the handle faced her hands. She picked up the fork but didn't use it. She ate like she'd forgotten how. Hands trembling, mouth slow, then faster. One bite. Then another. Then a full-bodied shiver. The potatoes vanished in seconds. The gravy was gone next. Her nose ran but she didn't wipe it. Her hands shook and her shoulders did too. Not from cold now, but from the quiet unraveling of a child's restraint. Her first sob made no sound. Just a little hitch in her throat. The second followed a breath later. Then her jaw clenched and she tried to swallow them all down like another mouthful of food. Callum said nothing. But he reached for the edge of his coat and tugged it around behind her back. Not touching her. Just close enough to warm. Close enough to count. The townsfolk watched the whole time behind frosted glass and closed mouths. Later, Sheriff Booth walked by, spurs silent on the snow. He stopped at the edge of the porch, looked from the girl to Callum, then down at the plate scraped clean. "She's not yours," he said flat. Callum didn't answer. "She's not nobody's now, far as I heard." Callum glanced at the sheriff once, brief and cold. "That's so." The sheriff nodded. "Parents froze last night. Found him in a wagon out past the ridge. Thought they was just sleeping. They weren't." The girl didn't stop eating. She was licking her fingers, cheeks wet with tears, too numb to care. The sheriff sighed. "We'll get someone from the church. Maybe send her east. Or one of them homes in Cheyenne." Callum turned his eyes back to the street. "She looks warm enough right now. That ain't your decision." "No," Callum said. "It's hers." The sheriff looked like he might say more. But he didn't. Just walked off, crunching snow behind him. The girl finally looked at Callum. Not with gratitude. Not even curiosity. Just steady. "I ain't got nowhere," she said, voice like gravel in warm water. It was the first thing she'd said since arriving. He didn't respond. Just stood, picked up his gloves and adjusted his hat. "You do now," he said. Then walked off. She watched him go, still clutching the edge of his coat. The barn was old but warm. Straw in the corners. A pot-bellied stove burning slow in the center. One horse in the far stall, half asleep and twitching its ears. He brought her there that night, without a word to anyone. She carried a single cloth sack. All she had. Inside, a tin whistle, a threadbare scarf, and a wood button shaped like a sun. He showed her the hay loft. "You can sleep up there. Not fancy, but dry." She nodded. "Water's in the barrel. Don't drink the bucket by the wall, used to clean tack." She nodded again. He watched her for a second too long, then turned. "Door locks from inside. Keep it that way." The wind howled through the slats. She sat down slow, toes tucked under her skirt. She didn't ask questions. He was halfway out when she spoke again. "I don't got a name." He paused in the doorway. "Everyone's got a name. My mama called me Ruthie. But she gone." He turned just enough so she could see the side of his face. "Then Ruthie it is." And then he was gone. By morning, the town had already decided she didn't belong. Nellie Mae at the bakery said she heard the girl stole from Callum. Took food, didn't say thanks. Didn't curtsy. Didn't smile. Just wandered in and sat like she owned the porch. Old Earl said he saw her digging near the chapel, burying something under a tree. Probably some hex, he said. Probably some wildling child. Oughta be watched. Ruthie didn't answer back. Didn't know how. She helped where she could. Brushed the horse. Stacked kindling. Ate slowly now, always with the fork, always after asking. Callum didn't talk much either. But each morning there was something left on the edge of the barn stairs. A pair of mittens. A boiled egg. A leather strap to fix her shoe. She didn't thank him. He didn't expect her to. But one night she waited until he stepped back out from the main house. Then held the whistle to her lips and played the first few notes of a lullaby. It was out of tune. But it was enough to stop him cold. One morning the church bell rang for the wrong reason. Callum was working the fence when the sheriff came again. "Got a cousin," Booth said. "Tommy. 10. Taken east, but the orphanage burned down. Boys heading back west. Kin. Legal." Callum stood there, hand on the post. "She'd be better off with blood," the sheriff said. "I doubt it. She's not yours." "I know. You can't keep collecting strays, Callum." He looked up at that. "Quiet. Come." Voice flat. "Don't call her that." Sheriff narrowed his eyes. "Then what is she?" Callum took a moment. "She's a kid." That night Ruthie was gone. Boot prints in the snow led west. Callum followed. Not in a panic. Not in a rush. But with a kind of dread that lodged in his ribs and pulled slow with every step. He found her near the same ridge where her parents froze. Sitting beside a stump, scarf tied to her fingers, legs tucked under, shivering. He didn't ask why. Didn't scold. He just took off his coat and wrapped her in it. "I didn't want to be left again," she whispered. "You weren't." Her voice cracked. "But you didn't say I could stay." "I didn't think I had to." The wind lifted the snow in tiny spirals. The trees whispered like they were holding breath. Callum looked up at the sky, then down at the girl bundled in his coat. "Let's go home, Ruthie." And for the first time she nodded, and leaned against him. The barn smelled of old wood and older ghosts. In the mornings, light filtered through the slats like blessings slipped between prayers, narrow and golden and quiet. Ruthie would sit up in the hayloft before Callum stirred, fingers tucked under her arms, watching dust rise from the floor like it was something holy. She didn't speak much. But her silence was fuller now, like it held words she was still carving inside her chest. She carried herself smaller than her age, but the way she walked, careful like not to wake something, made Callum wonder what weight had already settled on that small spine. She'd been with him a week. 7 days of frostbit mornings and quiet dinners. 7 nights of her curled in the loft, tucked under 2 quilts that smelled of cedar and horses. She never asked for more. Never reached for anything she hadn't been given. And still, He'd catch her tracing the wood grain on the walls as if she were memorizing its shape in case she was asked to leave. She never touched the hearth in the cabin. Never stood too near the stove. Always preferred the barn even when the wind rattled the doors. Callum had started leaving the lantern on outside his window, just so she'd know he hadn't gone. On the 8th morning she came into the kitchen with her hands behind her back. Callum looked up from his coffee. "You're up early." She nodded. "You hungry?" Another nod. But she didn't sit. He waited. Let her find the words on her own time. Then she said, "Do you got something I can burn?" He blinked once. "What for?" Her face didn't flinch. "I need to bury it. It can't go into the ground whole." He set the cup down. "What is it?" She pulled out a small cloth parcel. Tied in twine. Stained dark at the corner. Callum reached but didn't open it. "Something of theirs?" he asked gently. She nodded. "Mama's kerchief. Pa's fiddle peg. I tried to leave it out there but it keeps coming back. In dreams. In my chest." She swallowed. "So I need it to go away." He looked out the window. Snow still lay like silence across the yard. "We can burn it together," he said. But she shook her head. "No. Alone." He nodded. "Back of the barn. There's a pit near the woodpile." She turned to go. He called after her, "Don't stay out too long. Wind's picking up." She didn't answer, but he saw the smallest tilt of her head. Enough to mean she'd heard. By the time he stepped out 20 minutes later, the snow had begun to fall again. Big, lazy flakes that spun sideways on the wind. Behind the barn, Ruthie stood beside a blackened pit with the parcel still in her hands. Her eyes were closed. Lips moving, no sound. He didn't speak. Just leaned against the wall and waited. After a moment she set it down, lit a small stick from a candle stub, and pressed the flame to the edge. Smoke rose. Thin and twisting. The kind that smells like pine and sorrow. Her face didn't change, but her fingers trembled. When it was done she sat beside it. Not shivering. Just still. He walked over, crouched beside her. "You buried it." She nodded. "You feel better?" "I feel like ash." He didn't try to answer that. They sat together until the wind kicked snow across the coals. Later, when she came inside, there was soot on the hem of her skirt. Stayed there for days. She never brushed it off. The town noticed. Nellie Mae leaned over her counter and dropped 2 biscuits in a cloth bag. "So that's the girl then," she said. Callum didn't answer. "You always did take in strays." His hand stopped just short of his coin purse. "I don't mean it ugly," she added quickly. "Just, she ain't yours." Callum's voice stayed even. "She's not an animal. She got folks. Dead. Kin?" "Not yet." Nellie's mouth twisted. "You planning to keep her?" He didn't look up. "She's not a sack of flour." "Well," Nellie said, folding the cloth tighter, "I don't know what folks are whispering, but it don't look right. A man your age. A girl that small. Alone." He met her eyes then. And whatever she thought she was going to say next never left her mouth. He picked up the biscuits and left exact change on the counter. The next week passed slow. Callum fixed the chicken coop. Ruthie helped, handing him nails, holding boards in place with her mittened hands. She didn't talk unless spoken to, but sometimes she hummed. Strange, sharp little notes that trailed off as soon as he got too close. One morning he found her inside the barn, combing through hay with her fingers like she'd lost something. "What are you looking for?" She held up a rusted nail. "Treasure." He raised an eyebrow. "Things nobody else wants," she said. "But they still shine a little." He didn't laugh. Just nodded once. "World's full of those." That afternoon she swept the porch. Carefully. As if even the snow deserved some ceremony. He carved her a little whistle from an old cedar scrap. Left it on the fence post. Said nothing. She played it once, wrong and sharp, but kept it in her pocket after. One night, Callum came in late from the pasture and found the front door ajar. The fire was out. The room smelled like wet wool and cold wood. And Ruthie was gone. Panic didn't come loud. It settled low in his gut, a slow, twisting dread. He checked the barn. The coop. Behind the well. Nothing. Then he saw it. Footprints in the snow, small and quick, heading toward town. He grabbed his coat and followed. It didn't take long. She was behind the church, kneeling at the roots of a tree, hands red from digging. He walked up slow. Said her name. She didn't turn. "What are you doing out here?" "Burying again." He crouched beside her. She pointed at the earth. "They gave me my cousin's name. Said he's coming. Tommy. He's older. He'll take me now." Her voice was so flat it didn't sound like belief. More like surrender. Callum's chest tightened. "Do you want to go?" "I don't know." "You scared?" She shook her head. "Then what is it?" She pointed to the small hole. Inside a string doll. One she must have made herself. Its limbs were uneven. Its face sewn in a crooked line. "I made it for you," she said. "But if I leave I can't take it. So I thought I'd put it here. So it don't come with me." Callum stared at the little shape half covered in snow. "You bury things before they leave you, don't you?" She asked it like a child asking the world. He didn't answer. Instead he reached down, pulled the doll from the earth and dusted it off. Then without a word tucked it into his coat. "I don't bury what's not dead." She looked up at him, eyes wide. Not with hope. Just disbelief. He stood. "Come on. You'll catch cold." They walked back in silence. That night she stayed in the cabin. Curled on the floor beside the fire, wrapped in a wool blanket. She didn't ask for the bed. He didn't offer. But in the morning the doll sat on the mantel. And neither of them spoke of it again. Sheriff Booth came by 2 days later. "Got word," he said. "The cousin's arriving next week. If the boy wants her, there's not much more to say." Callum said nothing. Sheriff narrowed his eyes. "You gettin' attached?" "I'm keeping her warm." "That all?" Callum didn't answer. "You think this fixes something, Graves?" Booth said. "You lost a child. We know that. But this don't fill no grave." Callum's voice was low. "You got a family, Booth?" The sheriff looked away. "Then don't pretend you understand what I lost." Booth adjusted his gloves. "You better think long about what you're doing. Folks are watching. The girl's not yours. And winter makes men do strange things for the sake of ghosts." That night, Ruthie came in with snow in her hair and asked, "If he takes me, will I still be Ruthie?" Callum looked up from the fire. "You'll always be Ruthie. But not yours." He hesitated. "You don't belong to me, kid." Her voice was a whisper. "But I want to." He didn't have words for that. Instead he reached behind the chair and pulled out a book. A children's reader. Torn at the spine. Pages yellowed and soft. He handed it to her. "Then start with your letters." She stared down at the cover. "R for Ruthie?" He nodded. Her face broke just slightly into something close to a smile. That night she fell asleep on the rug with the book on her chest. And Callum sat by the fire a long while, staring at the doll on the mantel and wondering how much longer he had before someone came to take her. The snow didn't stop the next day. Or the next. But in the early hours of the 5th morning, a wagon arrived at the edge of town. Inside, a boy stepped down, tall, thin, freckled across the nose. 10 years old. His name, spoken quietly to the sheriff, rang through town like a bell someone forgot to muffle. Tommy Gage. King. By midday the town knew. By sundown Ruthie would know too. And as Callum stood at the window watching the snow swallow the last footprints leading to his door, he heard the creak of the barn, and the soft sound of a whistle, sharp and unsure, echo once across the field. The creek behind the barn hadn't frozen solid. It whispered beneath its crust like it was remembering warmer days. Ruthie crouched near its edge that morning, coat too big for her frame, sleeves falling past her fingertips as she traced shapes in the slush with a stick. Her breath fogged out in steady bursts, and her eyes stayed on the water like it could tell her something she hadn't yet found the words for. Callum stood on the ridge above, hammer paused mid-swing watching. He was fixing the fence again, not because it needed it, but because men like him needed something to do with their hands when their hearts got too loud. She hadn't said much since the sheriff's visit. Just more quiet than usual. The kind of quiet you can't fill with books or bread or even kindness. He saw her take something from her coat pocket, a small wooden horse, one of his carvings, and place it on the frozen edge of the creek. She pushed it gently and watched it float a few feet before tipping sideways, caught beneath a lace of ice. He went back to hammering. By midday the wind picked up and with it came wheels. Callum heard them before he saw them. Wagon wheels on packed snow, the creak of old wood, the sharp clip of hooves. He set his hammer down, wiped his hands on his coat, and stepped to the edge of the road just as the wagon turned toward the church. A boy climbed down. Tall for his age. Freckled. His boots were scuffed and too big, as if someone else's story had been passed down to his feet. He wore a brown cap low over his ears and held a satchel close to his chest. Tommy Gage. The cousin. Ruthie's kin. The sheriff gestured toward the chapel, speaking low to the boy, who nodded once, sharp and short, then turned to scan the road. Callum didn't wave, but Tommy looked straight at him. A boy's stare. Not soft, not cruel. Just measuring. That evening Ruthie didn't ask where the wagon had gone, but she watched the horizon more than usual, and she didn't eat all her soup. 2 days passed before Tommy came to the ranch. Callum found him already waiting at the gate, sitting on the fence like he belonged to it. Ruthie stood behind Callum's leg, eyes low. "You Ruthie?" the boy asked. She didn't answer. "I'm your cousin," he said. Mama sighed. "You look like her. Small and scrappy." Ruthie blinked but said nothing. "You don't talk." Callum's voice came quiet. "She talks when it matters." Tommy looked at him. "You the man who took her?" "I didn't take her." "She live here?" "She stays here." "Till when?" Callum crossed his arms. "That's up to her." The boy nodded. "Can I see the barn?" Callum gestured. "Go ahead." Tommy turned and walked without waiting. Ruthie followed, but slow. Callum watched her shoulders, not afraid but uncertain, like someone being shown a childhood home that didn't feel like hers anymore. The two children sat on the hayloft beam later that afternoon, legs swinging opposite. They didn't say much, but the quiet between them wasn't empty. Callum watched from the yard. He remembered that silence. The kind you carry when you've already seen the worst and no one's taught you yet that it's safe to hope again. That night, after Ruthie went to bed curled in the corner of the cabin with a blanket pulled to her chin, Callum stepped onto the porch and found Tommy standing under the stars. "You smoke?" the boy asked. Callum shook his head. "Don't like the smell." Tommy pulled something from his coat, a matchstick man he'd carved himself, rough and unsteady. "She's better off here," he said, voice flat. "But that ain't up to me." Callum didn't reply. Tommy turned. "They gonna let her choose?" "They'll pretend it's her choice. Make her pick between blood and comfort." Tommy shrugged. "She'll pick you. She don't remember me." Callum met his eyes. "Do you want her?" The boy hesitated. "I don't know what to want. I ain't got a place either." "Then maybe this is the place." Tommy looked out at the dark. "You ain't like most men. I've lost things." "That why you want her?" "I didn't know I wanted anything. Not till she sat down at that table." Tommy nodded but said nothing more. He left in the morning. By the 4th day the church announced the decision. There would be a hearing, nothing formal, just town folks gathering to weigh what felt right. Nellie Mae baked lemon biscuits for it, said it helped folks think better with sugar. Callum didn't go. Ruthie stood on the steps with him, bundled in her patched coat, fingers tight in her sleeves. "You want me to say something?" she asked. "No," he said. "I want you to say what's true." She nodded once. "Are you scared?" She looked up at him. No. And he believed her. But her lip trembled anyway. At the chapel, folks sat in the pews like they were watching a sermon. Tommy stood by the window, silent. The sheriff near the altar. Nellie Mae in the back with a tin of biscuits. Ruthie walked in alone, barefoot. Her coat swayed behind her as she walked. Each step careful, deliberate. The sheriff cleared his throat. "We're here to ask what's best for the girl. She has family. Tommy Gage. Young but blood. She's been stayin' with Mr. Graves. Not kin. Not legal." Callum didn't move from his place by the door. "She's been fed," the sheriff said. "She's been sheltered. But that don't make her his." Ruthie turned slowly and faced them all. "I didn't ask to be his," she said. I didn't ask to be anyone's. Murmurs rippled through the room. She raised her chin. But when I was cold, he gave me warmth. When I was hungry, he gave me food. When I didn't speak, he waited. When I buried things, he let me. Her voice wavered. When I ran, he came for me. She turned toward Callum. He's not my blood. But he didn't leave. Then she turned back to the room. You say blood matters most. But if blood don't show up, don't stay, don't help, what good is it? The room went quiet. Tommy stepped forward. She's right. The sheriff frowned. You're her family boy. I know. But he's the one she chose. And Ruthie turned and walked back to Callum. He didn't speak. Just opened his coat and let her stand under it. They didn't take her. Not that day. Not yet. But the whispers got louder. Callum heard them at the mercantile. At the well. At the feed store. Man living with a girl he didn't birth, didn't marry into. Don't seem proper. Something twisted in that man since he lost his wife. Callum didn't answer them. Didn't change his route. Didn't change his face. But inside, something cold curled tighter. One night, he came home to find Ruthie cleaning soot off her skirt. He stopped in the doorway. You didn't have to do that. She looked up. It looked wrong. He crouched beside her. Ash ain't wrong. Just means something burned. She blinked. Things that burn don't come back. He didn't answer. That night, after she slept, he pulled the doll from the mantel and placed it at the foot of her bed. Not as a gift, as a vow. 2 days later, Tommy returned. This time with a letter. From Cheyenne. The orphanage wanted both children. Said they'd place them together as kin. Said it was best. Callum read the letter twice. Hand steady. Voice steady. He folded it neatly and looked up. You want to go? Tommy looked at Ruthie. Only if she does. Callum turned to her. Well? Ruthie looked between them. I don't want to leave, she said. But I don't want him left alone either. Callum's voice dropped. You ain't responsible for anyone else's aloneness. She swallowed. Ain't that what love is? That struck him harder than he expected. The wind howled outside the cabin. He closed the letter and slipped it in his coat. We'll figure it out, he said. But he didn't say how. That night, Ruthie was gone again. The door left open. Her boots by the fire. Callum felt the cold hit his chest like a blow. He stepped outside. Snow drifted hard. Wind sharp enough to cut. He followed her trail past the barn, past the ridge, toward the old wagon where they'd found her parents weeks ago. He saw her there, kneeling by the wood, wrapped in a blanket, eyes closed. He knelt beside her. I didn't mean to scare you, she whispered. I just wanted to see them. He wrapped his arms around her. You'll never have to be alone again, Ruthie. Not unless you choose to. She looked up at him. Then I choose you. And he lifted her gently, wrapped in wool and silence, and carried her home. The next morning, something shifted in the wind. A new letter arrived. Not from Cheyenne, but from a circuit judge in Laramie. A name had been submitted by a local woman, Nellie May, requesting that Callum Graves be allowed to apply for legal guardianship. Even without blood. Even without marriage. Sometimes, she'd written in the margin, it ain't blood or law that makes a family. Sometimes it's who shows up. Callum stared at the letter for a long while. Then he looked at Ruthie. And said softly, You still got me, kid? She didn't answer. But she didn't let go of his hand. Snow melted slowly off the porch railing that morning, dripping like time itself, soft, unnoticed, and constant. Ruthie sat cross-legged on the steps, combing the tangled mane of a horsehair doll Callum had carved for her weeks back. The doll's face had no mouth, just 2 gentle eyes and a thin stitched brow. Ruthie said it didn't need to speak. It only needed to stay. Callum watched her through the cabin window, coffee cooling in his hand. There was a quiet steadiness in her now, like frost-hardened earth thawing under sun. He'd seen children survive hunger and cold. But what Ruthie was doing now, learning to exist in stillness without fear, that was rarer. That stillness didn't last long. By noon, Nellie May arrived on foot, cheeks red from the wind, apron dusted with flour. She held a bundle of warm biscuits in one hand and a newspaper in the other. They put it in print, she said before she even crossed the threshold. Right there in the Laramie Gazette. Unmarried rancher seeking custody of girl not his blood. Folks'll read that how they want to. Callum opened the door wide but said nothing. Ruthie stood just behind him. She didn't reach for the biscuits. Her eyes were locked on the folded paper in Nellie's hand. Nellie sighed. I tried to help, I did. But the more they hear about it, the more they think something ain't clean. Is it a crime, Callum asked quietly, to not want her tossed into another wagon east? Nellie looked down. You know how people are. I do, he said. That's why I don't listen to them. Still the words followed him. All afternoon as he fixed the shutter that banged in the wind. As he split wood. As he watched Ruthie sitting beneath the clothesline, head bent, mouth set in silence. Later, at the Mercantile, Earl Cobb muttered under his breath just loud enough to be heard. Man oughta mind his own. Ain't right keepin' a stray like that. Callum's hand stilled over the sack of flour. She's a child, he said, turning slowly. Not a stray. Not a burden. Not a charity case. Earl snorted. Then what is she? Callum stared a long moment, eyes narrowed like a man sighting down a rifle. She's mine. The room went quiet after that. Even the shopkeeper pretended to sweep the same patch of floor for too long. Back home, Ruthie waited on the porch, her doll beside her. Did they say anything? She asked without turning. Callum set the flour down. They said what they always say. She nodded once. You upset? No. Liar, he said gently. She pulled her knees to her chest. If I was yours, they wouldn't call me stray. He sat beside her, the porch creaking softly beneath his weight. People call things stray when they don't understand what's been through the storm and survived anyway. She looked at him then. So what do you call it? He took a breath. I call it strong. I call it still here. She rested her head on his arm. I don't want to go anywhere else. You don't have to. But what if they say I do? Then we fight. Her voice dropped. They might win. He didn't answer. But his hand found hers and held it steady. That night, Ruthie didn't sleep in the barn or by the hearth. She asked for the bed and he gave it up without question. Her fingers stayed curled around the edge of the quilt like she didn't trust softness not to vanish in the dark. Callum sat in the rocker by the window watching snowfall blur the hills. The judge's letter still sat folded on the table beside him. Ink faded, signature firm. But no promise in ink ever felt as real as a child's trust pressed into your palm. In the morning, Tommy was back. He stood at the edge of the porch, this time holding a sack over his shoulder and a rifle tied in twine. You run away? Callum asked, though the answer was plain. Tommy shrugged. They tried to send me east again. Figured if I'm already trouble, might as well be yours. Ruthie opened the door behind them. She didn't speak. Just stared. Tommy looked at her, then at Callum. She yours yet? Not by paper, Callum said. But yes. Tommy nodded. Good. You got room for two? Callum smiled. Don't I always? That night, Callum carved a second plate into the table. Not with words. With notches. One for Ruthie. One for Tommy. Each meal a tally. Each tally proof. Proof that things don't have to be born to belong. The storm came just after dusk, wind curling over the ridge like it meant to tear down everything not nailed in place. Snow came sideways, thick as cotton wads and twice as fast. Callum paced the front of the cabin, lantern swinging in his hand, smoke from the chimney whipped into a frenzy overhead. Ruthie and Tommy had gone to fetch kindling from the barn. They were late. He stepped outside, called their names once into the wind. No answer. Then a flash, too quick to be lightning. A sound like splintered wood. He ran. The barn doors had blown open. Snow had crept in, turning hay to slush. Inside, the kindling lay scattered across the floor, but no children. His breath fogged hard and fast. Then he saw it, footprints heading out back. Small. Bare. Ruthie's. Callum cursed low and followed, the lantern barely cutting through the curtain of white. They had gone toward the creek. Heart pounding, boots sinking with every step, he reached the bend and stopped. There she was. Ruthie stood frozen in front of the old wagon where her parents had died, arms wrapped around herself, dress whipping in the wind. Tommy crouched beside her, trying to shield her from the cold with his coat. But she wasn't shivering. She was staring, eyes wide, empty, like the past had swallowed her whole again. Callum dropped to his knees beside them. "Ruthie, I thought maybe, if I came back here I'd feel them," she whispered. "But I don't. Just cold." Tommy looked up. She ran. I followed. Callum wrapped his coat around both children and pulled them in. "You don't need to find them in the place they died. You carry them. Right here." He placed a hand gently on her chest. "I forgot their faces," she whispered. "That don't mean they're gone." She buried her face in his shirt, and for the first time in weeks, her tears came without shame. He held her tighter, felt Tommy's small hand grip the hem of his coat. When he looked up, the snow had stopped falling. By morning, word had spread that Ruthie had run again, that Callum had taken off after her like a madman. Sheriff Booth showed up at the ranch, coat dusted with snow, rifle slung across his shoulder. "You gonna keep chasing after ghosts forever, Graves?" Callum stood on the porch, children behind him. "Not ghosts," he said. "Family." Booth shook his head. "It's not legal. You ain't married. You ain't blood. You ain't got the standing." "I got the scars," Callum replied. "I got the food. I got the roof. I got the arms to hold them when no one else would. And the town's got rules. Then the town needs better ones." Behind him, Ruthie stepped forward, still in her patched coat, her chin held like iron. "I pick him," she said. "You keep asking if he picked me. But I pick him." Booth opened his mouth, but Ruthie wasn't done. "He came for me when the cold came. When the food was gone. When the wind was louder than my voice. He didn't ask what I had to offer. He just stayed." Tommy stood beside her. "You want to put us somewhere else? Fine. But you'll never make it feel like home." Booth exhaled hard and looked away. "A judge'll have to sort it. But don't count on mercy." Callum only nodded. "I don't need mercy. I need paper that matches what's already true." The sheriff left, boots crunching frost. That night, Ruthie sat at the table with the journal open, pencil in hand. "What are you writin'?" Tommy asked. She glanced at Callum, then smiled. "My name." And underneath it she wrote his. 2 days later the judge arrived. He wasn't the kind who smiled often. But he listened. He read letters. He watched Ruthie pour tea with careful hands, and he watched Tommy reach for Callum's calloused palm without thinking twice. Callum didn't plead. He simply spoke. "I never meant to find a child in the snow. I never meant to have two. But they were mine before anyone else stepped forward. That's what makes a father. Not ink." The judge set down his papers and said only this: "Don't make me regret this." Callum nodded once. "I won't." On the way out, Nellie Mae handed the judge a pie. And a Bible verse written on torn cloth: "Defend the orphan, plead for the widow." By nightfall it was done. Callum carved 2 new notches in the table. One for each of their names. And under it, a final line burned deep into the wood: "You still got me, kid."